Long story short, recently, a bunch of YouTubers I pay attention to got angry because a kangaroo said that he wants to say anonymous people's names if they insult him. Something like that. Yeah. Ultimately, all this means is that there's a lot of arguing about online anonymity, privacy, name-dropping and doxing going on at the moment. And that's my jam. So I figured I'd have my own little talk about these topics. So here I go. I do not believe that online anonymity should be your inviolable right no matter what. You shouldn't get to remain unnamed purely because you desire to be unnamed and have not consented to having your name spoken. What I do believe in, though, is more like the right to attempt online anonymity. In other words, I think you should be able to publish things and look around the net without attaching your real identity to what you've published and without being sneakily snooped on while you do it, especially not by government. Anonymity alone should not be considered justification for invasion of privacy. But, on the other hand, I do not think that I should be compelled to cooperate with your efforts to hide your identity. If you try to act anonymously, screw up and your behavior reveals who you are in a way that's publicly accessible, i.e. not private, that's on you. So look at it like this. You should be able to publish videos on YouTube using a pseudonym, as many of us do, without YouTube's owners giving away any information they've agreed to keep private. But let's say I'm watching some videos and come across one of yours. Your voice sounds really familiar to me, so I check a couple things and turns out you're some guy I know. Definitely. I could even prove it to someone else if I had to. Well, putting your real name out there for everyone to see would probably be a dick move. I don't think you're entitled to my silence. I shouldn't be obligated to self-censor in order to preserve your anonymity. I shouldn't have to pretend that I don't know who you are, or carefully avoid saying anything that might indirectly give your true identity away. In other words, you have to take responsibility for maintaining your own anonymity, and you can't just expect people not to put the puzzle together if you leave enough evidence lying around. If you don't put as much effort as you can into keeping your identity secret when publishing things online, you start to put the burden of maintaining your anonymity onto other people. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't times where keeping quiet would almost undoubtedly be the right thing to do. An obvious example being when the person you can connect to a post or pseudonym is in a place where what you'd be connecting their name to includes opinions they've expressed which would likely lead to violent retaliation if they were to be identified. If crime is involved, instead of putting the information out there, it may be wise to go to law enforcement. One exception being if the person has broken a law that you believe to be unjust. Depending on specifics, that might be enough reason for you to stay hush. On top of that, most of the time there's no good reason to go out of your way to deliberately spread knowledge of who's really behind a pseudonym or who's actually behind something that's been published online anonymously. I certainly don't support meaningless, malicious revelation of real names and other info just because you can. Trying to intimidate some kid who's dissed you, for example, would be pathetic, and it's also very hard for me to think of many good reasons to publish someone's address, phone number, and so on. But sometimes I think publicly unmasking people against their will can be justified. I'm going to ask you to use your imagination again for a moment. Let's pretend someone started a website where they review things, let's say video games, and they use a pseudonym. Their site blows up. Everything they post gets incredible numbers of views. People trust them. They have huge influence over people's decisions to buy games or not, and so on. Somehow, I come across undeniable proof of the real identity of who's running this site. Maybe I was looking for some information about this extremely popular writer. Nothing wrong with that, is there? Or maybe I just stumbled upon it while surfing the web. Either way, turns out they are very close friends with some of the people whose games they've given glowing reviews. Maybe they've even lived together, or loaned each other money. Maybe they were lovers. All of this, and all the evidence needed to show this, is out there for anyone to see. The reviewer does not disclose any of these ties in their reviews, and there's no way for me to tell people about this without attaching the writer's real identity to their pseudonym. Do I have to stay quiet about it? Whatever your answer to that is, I've got to tell you that, should I ever find myself in such a position, I sure as hell would expose them. You could easily imagine a much more serious issue along these lines too, but I wanted to put it in terms of something I might personally, realistically end up doing so that you can condemn me as a doxer if you feel obligated to do so. Here's another one. If I caught someone posting reviews of their own business using various pseudonyms and could prove it, I'd have no problem with exposing them. Now let's use our imaginations again for another very different scenario. Let's say there are two pseudonymous accounts on Twitter and the people behind those accounts have become friends. They've privately shared a little bit of info with each other about who they really are. One day, one of the accounts starts posting worrying messages about how everything is awful and there's no point to anything, finishing with a statement along the lines of them planning to end it all now. This scares the person behind the other account, and they ask if anyone knows whether their friend is okay or not. No one else knows anything about them, so they report the posts to Twitter. But the suicidal Anon's friend is still worried. They don't want someone to die because they didn't do everything they could. So, they try to figure out where this person lives based on what little they know, hoping perhaps to get in touch with law enforcement, their family, or anyone else who could help. Unfortunately, they have no success. Time passes and, in a panic, they post all the info they have about their friend and ask their Twitter followers for help. Let's say that means posting their name, some things they've said that might help find them, maybe a selfie, a bunch of stuff that, for someone else more skilled, would be enough to get all further information. Would you condemn that person for having doxed someone? In this case, justified might not be quite the right word, but I certainly think the concerned Anon's behavior could be understood. For me, revealing information about people is a bit of a grey area, because it depends on the circumstances. Why was it done? Did you reveal a single anonymous post or an entire false identity? Who did you expose? What could the consequences be? Did you reveal more than you had to? For me, all of this and more comes into consideration, although times when it's justified are quite rare. I've talked before about the value of anonymity, and I believe people need to be allowed to communicate anonymously with some expectation of privacy. However, you still need to put effort into hiding your identity. Other people cannot be expected to cover their eyes or hold their tongue if the mask you've made can be seen through, especially if you haven't done all you can to cover yourself. This is part of why the issue of name dropping and doxing on YouTube in particular is quite tricky for me. And I've been thinking about this because YouTube's where the discussion I've been following recently has been going on. A large number of YouTubers who use the platform to share their thoughts, value their privacy, and wish to remain anonymous behind a pseudonym for various reasons. I'm not one of them. My name's out there, my face is out there, various bits of info are out there because I put them out there willingly. But I don't have a problem with those who try to hide themselves. I think it's normally a good idea, in fact. That said, there are some things about this that should be considered, but rarely are. YouTubers tend to make lots of sacrifices when it comes to maintaining their anonymity and making it hard to connect what they've said to who they are. For example, instead of perhaps posting their messages anonymously to an image board, they have all created accounts that act as a record of various things they've said and done. It can get more complex if multiple people use one account, but let's keep it simple. It's a trade-off. Little bit more of a risk of perhaps slipping up or giving away too much for the ability to grow an audience, become well known, make money, etc. There may also be some concerns about Google's cooperation with government requests, depending on where you live. But YouTubers who want to remain anonymous are willing to take the risks because the benefits are worth it. A lot of YouTubers who wish to remain unnamed also use their natural voices. Viewers typically prefer that to most of the alternatives, and it will make your content more appealing than it would otherwise be. But of course, you've given away what you sound like. You've potentially made it easier to identify you. You might have to be careful not to publish other stuff elsewhere using your voice and real name, for example. But again, these folks find the benefits to outweigh any possible downside. They're willing to give up some ease of maintaining anonymity because it gets them something. Same as when anonymous YouTubers make claims about themselves. experiences they've had, expertise they have, where they live, where they have lived, and so on. Anything that might lend credibility to their message, while stripping away that much more of their mask. So many YouTubers are more than happy to make all these trade-offs, to throw away some of what hides them, because doing so brings personal benefit. There is one trade-off that they tend not to be so keen on though, and that trade-off is making anonymity harder to maintain by allowing people to say pseudonymous YouTubers' names. Yeah, happy to throw away a bit of privacy when it benefits them personally, so clearly not in that desperate need of true anonymity, but still not happy to throw some more away when that means not stepping on other people's freedom of expression. At what point, when you are doing things that work to expose yourself, do you forfeit the right to expect people to not look and to hold their tongue? Stop giving those of us who dig into things secrets to keep. Hide your shit. I'll try comparing this to real life, but it won't be a perfect fit. Yeah, when you go outside, you don't have to tell people you talk to anything about yourself. But if you have a bunch of paper with information about yourself that you've written on it falling out of your fucking pockets and being left around everywhere, is it wrong for people to look? And here's another question for you. Is it okay to publicly speculate about who might be behind a pseudonym when you don't know? If not, that's quite a hefty restriction on speech, isn't it? If it is okay, then what if the person guessing gets it right? And what's to stop someone masking a name reveal they know is correct as a guess? So many people seem happy to publish quite a lot of information about themselves really, but unhappy for you to look into it or share the results of you looking into it, because that crosses a line, I guess. I think not. People should be able to check into everything you've publicly put onto the net, just like anything else that's been published. If you want people to deal with your ideas only, put out your ideas only, and nothing about yourself. If you've decided to put out more than just ideas, they should be able to look into more than just your ideas, and whether it's right or not to then publish what they found out should be judged on a case-by-case basis. Dropping a name or more just because you can? Not great, to say the least. Exposing a pseudonymous YouTuber because they've been lying about themselves to a large audience, claiming things that have led to people listening to them and trusting them when none of it's true. Alright, maybe, but show what you need to show to prove it, and no more. Exposing a journalist in a way that would significantly change their audience's perspective on the news they report? Maybe their reporting seems to favor a leadership candidate, and by revealing a pseudonym they use online, by putting their name to it, you could expose them claiming that everything possible needs to be done to beat another leadership candidate. I'd personally be fine with that happening. For me, when trying to figure out where the line is by imagining situations like this, sometimes the consequences of not outing someone look like they could be worse than what could happen if you let the name slip. And, for now, this essentially outlines my personal measure of whether attributing anonymous activity to the real person behind it is justified or not. It's tricky, for sure, but that's where I'm at. Isn't that dangerous, though? Isn't accepting that this issue can come down to personal judgment, allowing for other people with a different perspective to reveal information in circumstances where I think it's unjustified? Couldn't mistakes be made? Yeah. And of course, condemnation once it's been done does jack all because the genie's out of the bottle. Not to mention that the info could be published anonymously. Then what can you do? But this brings us back to the point of this video. Somehow, respecting the value of anonymity is becoming something only those who are not anonymous must do. Somehow, responsibility for keeping secret who's behind a post or pseudonym is shifting disproportionately onto everyone but the person behind the post or pseudonym. Of course, I have a duty not to get in the way of you exercising your rights, but when it comes to privacy on the net, you've got to keep up your side of things too, or we've got a case of the Emperor's new pseudonym. I'd like to shift some of the burden back to those who wish to go unnamed. As dangerous as it could be if the idea that revealing info can be justified is accepted by the online masses, I think the alternative brings with it a far greater danger, a false sense of security. The people you really need to be able to hide from are not going to respect your internet code of honor. They're not going to respect the law either, and, in fact, they might even be the people who decide the law. This is where the fight should be, preventing limitations on the ability to hide. There are politicians and public figures, I've covered examples on this channel, who advocate measures that would restrict your ability to even try to hide your identity while using the internet, limiting your potential anonymous platform, shrinking the value of anonymity as a tool for free speech. But sadly, because people are sloppy or lazy and lack respect for why they have the right to act anonymously, the point I'm currently seeing argued over instead revolves around reducing people's right to speak freely so that incompetent internet dwellers can stay mostly unknown, even if their info can easily be found or figured out thanks to their own actions, or even if they're loose-lipped around strangers on the internet. This distraction just takes attention away from the real issues surrounding privacy online and puts two rights in conflict when they needn't be. As a side note, I also can't help but feel frustrated listening to complaints from people regarding obvious, willingly and knowingly made public dots being connected to reveal a person's identity, while a blood-sucking corporation is more than likely using technology to automatically monitor and collect every little bit of information about the person it can as they're making the complaint. Though I know that's seen as one of the less exciting privacy concerns for some reason. So let's get back to a hotter issue to wrap this up and make my last point with. People who criticize Islam often fear violent backlash from crazy, murderous Islamists. While their fear might stop them from publishing criticism with their name attached, there are various ways for them to get what they want to say out there onto the net without putting a name to it. And they're comfortable doing that because it is not criticizing Islam that carries risk. What can be dangerous is having criticism of Islam attributed to you. Obviously, if Islamists don't know you wrote it, they can't come after you for it, can they? Let's pretend someone's made a Twitter account and adopted a pseudonym. They use that account to criticize Islam, and they don't want their real name to be known. If they're somewhere where they are realistically facing some kind of risk, and they're not just being a coward, I'd say it's not a great idea to reveal any information about them. Even if you are them. Whoa, hold on, you might say. They can publish whatever they want about themselves. The issue is that you can't just put it out there without their consent. Of course they can, but here's the problem. Like I said, if a nutcase Islamist gets angry at what you've written and doesn't know you're behind the account, they can't go after you. If they're led to believe someone else is behind the account though, that person's going to get hacked to pieces. I suppose, if you're a terrible person, you could deliberately set someone up with subtle hints, posting as if you're them in the hopes that a maniac will think it is them, which would obviously be horrible. In the same way, part of the reason it's not a great idea to connect a name to anonymous criticism of Islam, besides to protect the person who really posted it, is because the consequences of being wrong could be so severe compared to connecting a name to something else. All that should be obvious. But a question I have is, if you're using an account to criticize Islam anonymously, like I just described, you let out some bits and pieces of info about yourself, and then that ultimately leads to a religious psychopath killing someone else who that info lines up with, is that on you at all? Whether it is or not, if you are going to be publishing something that you believe could bring danger to whoever it's attributed to, I see two ways of avoiding putting others at risk. And why would you choose not to avoid that? So, if you're alone and not connected to anyone, you could identify yourself and take all the risk without a chance of being misidentified. Or, you could post it anonymously and make certain to give no indication whatsoever of who might be behind the account or post. I'm personally ignorant of the technical side of anonymity online, but you should be doing what you can there too. Don't give anyone anything to back up speculation with. In doing your best to be absolutely unidentifiable when you take advantage of your right to anonymity, you are protecting not only yourself, but anyone who could be mistaken for you. Not to mention any people you might live with or be connected to who could be put in danger by your negligence if what you're saying is so unsafe to be associated with. This, and everything else I've said in this video, is why I believe that the right to hide your identity must come with a duty to do it well. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.